Imagine carrying a wound so deep, so silent that you don't even realize it's been shaping every decision, every relationship, every fear you've ever had. Think about this. What if some of the most difficult struggles in your adult life, your inability to trust, your fear of abandonment, your tendency to sabotage your own success, were not flaws in your character, but echoes of a childhood never truly healed? This is not just about trauma as we usually imagine it, the big, visible, dramatic events. No, sometimes the deepest wounds are invisible. Sometimes trauma is a silent absence, the absence of safety, the absence of validation, the absence of love. And in this video, we are going to uncover the hidden architecture of childhood trauma. We will explore how it rewires the brain, distorts identity, and quietly shapes the adult self. And above all, we will show how awareness is the first step to liberation. This is a journey into the unconscious, a journey into the invisible forces that silently dictate our lives. Stay with us until the end, because the final insight we will share is the most powerful of all, one that can shift the way you see yourself and others forever. If you value deep explorations into the human mind, psychology, and the timeless wisdom of thinkers who dared to look into the soul, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with those who need it. Comment below, have you ever felt like your adult struggles might have deeper roots than you once believed? Your voice matters. Your story might be the key to someone else's healing. Childhood trauma is not rare. According to the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, over 60% of adults have experienced at least one major traumatic event in their early years. These include abuse, neglect, emotional abandonment, or growing up with mentally ill or addicted caregivers. But here's the truth. Trauma is not about what happens to you. It's about what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. Dr. Gabor Maté, a leading voice in trauma research, explains it best. He says that trauma is not the event. It's the disconnection it creates within ourselves. Trauma is not just being hurt. It's being hurt and left alone with it. It's having to suppress your emotions to survive. It's learning to adapt by fragmenting parts of your soul. The child learns, I must not cry, I must not speak, I must not feel. The problem is that what helped you survive as a child becomes a prison as an adult. Think about the child who grew up with an unpredictable parent. One day warm, the next cold. That child becomes hypervigilant, always scanning for signs of danger. Fast forward to adulthood, and this same individual might struggle with anxiety, obsessive thoughts, or difficulty relaxing even in safe environments. The body has learned to live in a state of alert, because that's what was once needed to stay safe. Or consider the child who felt invisible, never praised, never truly seen. That child might become a perfectionist, desperately chasing achievements to earn love. Or the opposite, so convinced of their unworthiness that they never try at all. This is not weakness. This is adaptation. These are brilliant coping mechanisms, crafted by a child brain doing everything possible to survive. But here's the paradox. The very strategies that once protected you now hold you back. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, believed that our shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress or disown, is often shaped in childhood. He wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. How many of us are living out unconscious patterns, repeating relationships, reliving old pain, all because our inner child is still trying to resolve a wound we don't even remember? When we start to explore childhood trauma, we aren't just talking about memory. We're talking about the nervous system. We're talking about the body. Trauma is stored not just in the mind, but in the cells. A child who grows up in fear often develops a dysregulated nervous system. They might swing between hyperarousal, anxiety, panic, overthinking, and hypoarousal, numbness, disconnection, depression. And this leads to one of the most painful outcomes of unresolved trauma, self-sabotage. How many times have you gotten close to something you wanted, a relationship, a job, a dream, and then suddenly everything falls apart? You pull away, you shut down, you lash out, and you don't know why. Here's the truth. If your nervous system learned that safety is dangerous, that love means pain, that success means pressure, that attention means judgment, then it will reject those things, even if your mind says it wants them. This is why healing trauma is not about just thinking positive. It's about reprogramming the deep layers of your psyche and your body that were shaped by years of conditioning. It's about building a new internal map of safety, trust, and self-worth. And that journey starts with awareness. Ask yourself, what did I have to suppress to survive? What parts of me were not welcome in my childhood environment? Where in my adult life do I feel stuck in patterns that seem beyond my control? Your answers to these questions may open doors you didn't know existed. They may lead you back to the child within, the one still waiting to be seen, heard, and held. And as we continue, we will dive deeper into the specific types of trauma, how they manifest in adulthood, and the neuroscience behind it all. We'll also explore the revolutionary insights from modern psychology and ancient wisdom that offer hope and healing. But remember this, the most dangerous trauma is the one we do not recognize, because when pain becomes familiar, it stops being questioned and starts being normalized. You are not broken. You adapted. And now, it's time to unlearn the adaptations that no longer serve you. There are many types of childhood trauma, and each leaves a unique fingerprint on the adult self. Some are obvious: physical abuse, abandonment, or exposure to violence. But others are subtle, so subtle they often go unnoticed. Emotional neglect, conditional love, chronic criticism, being parentified, or growing up in an environment where your feelings were never validated. These are what we call invisible traumas, and yet they often do the deepest harm. Consider this. A child doesn't have the cognitive tools to say, "My parent is emotionally unavailable because they're depressed." Instead, the child thinks, "I must be unlovable." The brain of a child is egocentric. It personalizes everything. And from that belief, a distorted identity begins to form. It's not just the events themselves, but the meaning we give them that creates the trauma. Let's take the example of emotional neglect. You had food, shelter, maybe even toys. But every time you were sad, you were told to stop crying. When you were scared, you were told to toughen up. When you were excited, you were told to calm down. Over time, you learned a dangerous lesson, that your feelings are wrong, that your needs are too much, that you must suppress your authentic self to be accepted. This internalized message becomes a blueprint. You grow up and begin repeating this script in relationships. You ignore your needs. You become overly accommodating. You fear confrontation, even when it's necessary. You may even feel guilty for asking for help. Why? Because the child in you still believes that love is conditional, that to be accepted, you must abandon parts of yourself. This is not your fault. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, explains that trauma changes the way the brain perceives the world. It keeps the brain locked in a survival loop, scanning constantly for danger, even when there is none. Trauma creates what he calls a fundamental reorganization of the way mind and brain manage perceptions. So, what seems like irrational behavior in adulthood, self-doubt, panic, people-pleasing, or emotional detachment, is actually the result of a nervous system that adapted to survive a dangerous or invalidating environment. One of the most important realizations we can have is that trauma responses are not signs of weakness. They are signs of strength. They are survival codes, brilliant unconscious strategies developed when you were too small to protect yourself any other way. But survival is not the same as living. So how do we begin to heal? It starts by naming what happened, and even more importantly, naming what didn't happen. What love was withheld, what validation was never given, what boundaries were never respected. Many people resist identifying with the word trauma because they compare their pain to others who had it worse. But this comparison invalidates your story. Pain is not a competition. Your wound is real even if no one else sees it. Next, we must turn inward, not to blame our parents or caretakers, but to understand what their limitations cost us. Most parents did the best they could with the tools they had, but intention does not erase impact. Many caregivers themselves were traumatized children in adult bodies, and so the cycle repeats until someone has the courage to break it. Healing childhood trauma often involves a process of reparenting yourself. That means learning to give to yourself what you never received: unconditional love, consistent care, emotional safety. It means becoming the adult you needed when you were young. And yes, it is deeply uncomfortable, because the brain resists change, especially when change means confronting old wounds. But discomfort is not the enemy. It is the threshold of transformation. The great psychologist Alice Miller wrote, The truth about our childhood is stored up in our body, and although we can repress it, we can never alter it. Our intellect can be deceived, our feelings manipulated, our perceptions confused, and our body tricked with medication. But someday the body will present its bill, and that's what happens. The unhealed trauma manifests in depression, chronic illness, autoimmune conditions, addiction, failed relationships. The body says, "Please, listen. It's time." Have you ever wondered why you keep attracting the same kind of partner, or why no matter how much you achieve, it never feels like enough, or why you feel disconnected from your own joy? These are not random experiences. They are patterns, and behind every pattern is a story, a wound, a belief. And here's the beautiful truth. That story can be rewritten. But first, we must shine light into the darkness. One of the most powerful tools in trauma recovery is self-compassion. It sounds simple, but for survivors of childhood trauma, it's often the hardest thing because you were taught, either directly or indirectly, that your worth was tied to performance, compliance, or silence. Compassion feels foreign, undeserved. But self-compassion is not weakness. It is the medicine. As psychologist Kristin Neff explains, self-compassion activates the caregiving system of the brain. It soothes the inner critic, calms the stress response, and creates the internal safety needed for healing. When you say to yourself, "It's okay to feel this. I am here for me. I survived something that should never have happened," you begin to rewire the brain. You begin to heal. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how trauma affects identity and relationships, how we often wear masks to protect ourselves, and how those masks eventually suffocate us. We'll look at attachment styles, emotional triggers, and the unconscious roles we play in adulthood that were scripted in childhood. And finally, we will uncover the most profound truth of all, one that has the power to transform pain into wisdom and wounds into gateways. Stay with us, because the most important revelation is yet to come. Have you ever felt like you're playing a role that isn't truly yours? You smile when you're hurting. You say yes when you mean no. You work harder, love harder, give more just to feel enough. But beneath the surface, there's a quiet voice asking, when will it be my turn to be seen, to be real? This is the cost of unhealed childhood trauma. It doesn't just influence how we feel, it shapes who we think we are. Many of us walk through life wearing emotional armor, masks carefully crafted in childhood to protect us. The caretaker, the overachiever, the peacemaker, the rebel, the invisible one. These identities were never chosen consciously. They were formed as survival strategies in environments where being authentic was dangerous, or worse, ignored. Let's look at how these roles originate. The caretaker, for example, is often born from a home where a child had to grow up too fast, perhaps because a parent was ill, emotionally unstable, or simply absent. The child learns to suppress their needs in order to meet the needs of others. As an adult, this person becomes the one everyone depends on, but silently suffers from burnout, resentment, and a deep fear of being a burden. The overachiever often comes from an environment where love was earned, not given. Success, performance, and being the best became the only ways to feel valued. Yet underneath the trophies and accomplishments is often a terrified child, still trying to prove their worth. The peacemaker grows up in chaos, in a household marked by conflict, addiction, or emotional volatility. To avoid danger, they become the diplomat, always smoothing things over. They lose touch with their own voice, afraid that any conflict will lead to rejection or violence. These roles, while functional, come at a great cost. They disconnect us from our authentic self, from joy, from spontaneity, from truth. Renowned psychotherapist John Bradshaw said, "The wounded inner child contaminates intimacy in adult relationships." And he was right, because trauma doesn't just live inside us, it plays out in how we connect with others. One of the most common manifestations is through attachment styles. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, explains how early relationships with caregivers shape the way we bond with others throughout life. If a child experiences consistent love and safety, they typically develop a secure attachment. But for many trauma survivors, that wasn't the case. Anxious attachment develops in children who received love inconsistently, sometimes present, sometimes withdrawn. These individuals often grow up to be hypersensitive to rejection, constantly seeking reassurance, fearing abandonment even when there's no real threat. They may become clingy, overly dependent, or emotionally intense in relationships. Avoidant attachment, on the other hand, forms when a child learns that expressing needs leads to rejection or ridicule. As adults, they often suppress emotions, avoid intimacy, and pride themselves on self-reliance, not realizing that their independence is a form of protection against disappointment. Then there's disorganized attachment, often the result of severe trauma, abuse, or neglect. Here, the child experiences both fear and longing toward their caregiver. This leads to conflicting behaviors in adulthood, craving connection yet fearing it, pushing people away then panicking when they leave. Understanding your attachment style is not about labeling, it's about awakening. When you know the blueprint, you can begin to revise it. But healing isn't about fixing yourself, it's about reclaiming yourself. Many trauma survivors unconsciously live by limiting beliefs formed in early childhood. Beliefs like, I am not lovable, I must earn love, if I express my feelings, I'll be rejected. These beliefs aren't facts. They are emotional conclusions drawn by a child trying to survive, but they persist into adulthood, operating beneath the surface, influencing choices, sabotaging joy. So how do we rewrite these beliefs? First, we must create safety, emotionally and physiologically. The nervous system must learn that vulnerability is not danger. This happens through practices like somatic therapy, mindfulness, breathwork, or trauma-informed coaching, approaches that speak the language of the body, not just the intellect. Then we must confront the stories we carry. What is the core narrative you've told yourself about who you are and what you deserve? When did you first believe that love comes at a cost? Who taught you that your voice doesn't matter? Answering these questions with honesty and compassion opens the doorway to change. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." We cannot change the past, but we can change the relationship we have with it. We can begin to see ourselves not as broken, but as survivors of an experience that shaped us, but does not have to define us. In the mirror of trauma work, we often meet our inner child, the forgotten self within us that never stopped hoping. The one who still longs to be held, to be told, you are not too much, you are not too sensitive, you are not unworthy, you are enough. This is not poetic sentiment, it is psychological truth. Studies in neuroplasticity show that the brain can change, beliefs can change, identity can evolve, but it requires intention and repetition. Healing is not a one-time realization, it is a daily practice of self-return. Now consider this. What roles have you played in your life that no longer fit? What masks are you ready to remove? Who might you become if you weren't carrying the weight of your early wounds? As we move to the final part of this journey, we will explore the ultimate transformation, how trauma, when faced with courage, can become a gateway to purpose. We'll look at post-traumatic growth and the stories of those who turned their deepest pain into their greatest power. The last insight we'll share is not only the most important, it is also the most liberating. You won't want to miss what's coming next. There comes a moment in the healing journey when something shifts. It's not dramatic. There's no music, no applause, but it's real. It's the quiet realization that the pain you carried no longer controls you, and that your story, once a source of shame, has become a source of strength. This is what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. While trauma shakes the foundations of who we are, it can also initiate a profound rebuilding. Not a return to who we were before the pain, but an evolution into someone wiser, deeper, more compassionate. Someone who has walked through fire and emerged with a deeper understanding of life, of others, and of themselves. Dr. Richard Tedeschi, a leading researcher in post-traumatic growth, identifies 5 areas where survivors often experience transformation: deeper appreciation for life, improved relationships, new possibilities, increased personal strength, and spiritual development. These are not just compensations for trauma, they are alchemies of it. But this growth does not happen by accident. It happens by choice, the choice to stop running from the past and to start integrating it into a new future. Think about the metaphor of a broken bone. When it heals correctly, it becomes stronger at the point of fracture. Likewise, the human spirit can become more resilient at the very sight of its deepest wounds, not because the wound disappears, but because we learn how to care for it. And here is the most powerful truth of all, the one we promised to reveal at the beginning. Your trauma is not your identity. It is something that happened to you. It shaped you, but it is not you. You are not broken. You are becoming. You are not your triggers. You are the awareness that notices them. You are not the beliefs you inherited. You are the one who can rewrite them. And this power, the power to redefine yourself, is your birthright. This is not about denying pain. It's about transcending it, about finding meaning in the ashes, about becoming the author of your own life. Consider the stories of those who turned their trauma into purpose. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, lost everything: his family, his freedom, his dignity. Thanks for looking.